Together with Ambassador Mora, the U.S. State Department, and all of you, take this moment to raise our voices for the countless political prisoners languishing in Cuban jails. They are artists, journalists, activists, family members, and people who were jailed for exercising their fundamental rights. They are subjected to harsh conditions, denied due process, and often held in solitary confinement, unable to communicate with anyone, including family, friends, or even impartial legal representatives. In celebrating our 50th anniversary, GABA will never forget the plight of our founders who fled their homeland in order to seek the safety and freedom for their families. GABA past presidents and many GABA members were or have fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, and friends who were unjustly incarcerated solely for speaking out against the atrocities of the Cuban regime. As you will soon hear about in more detail, GABA currently represents 52 men and women in prison for their actions following the July 11, 2021 peaceful protests on the island. GABA has and will continue to take on the fight on behalf of these people in Cuba who fight every day for the dream of a free and democratic Cuba, including the political prisoners who remain jailed. But let us not forget the plight of the women who stand on the front lines of Cuba's struggle for democracy. These courageous women, including the four we will recognize today, were stripped of their freedoms for speaking out against the regime, facing double burden, targeted harassment, threats, arbitrary detention for activism, combined with the everyday struggles inherent in a patriarchal society. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world where expressing your beliefs could land you in a cramped cell, separated from your loved ones with minimal, if any, health care. Imagine the fear a mother must feel when advocating for a better future for her children. This is the reality for the countless women in Cuba. We cannot turn a blind eye to these human rights abuses. Cuba, the U.S. government, the governments of the world, and the international community must continue to stand in solidarity with the Cuban people. Particularly these brave women who fight for a future where their voices can be heard, their criticism addressed, and their basic freedoms protected. Let us unite and urge the Cuban regime to release all political prisoners, men and women alike, and embrace the principles of democracy and human rights. The world is watching, and the fight for freedom in Cuba will not be silenced. I would like to welcome next up to the podium our mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, for a few brief remarks.
Thank you so very much for allowing me to be part of this very somber occasion, to Cava, the Cuban American Bar Association, for organizing, for Libertad, and Father, for welcoming us to this hall where we've had so many of these conversations. We have had so many of these conversations right here. And that is a very special place for so many in this community and for all of us to know that this is a beacon of hope and a place that stands as a special place for the courage of Cubans across Miami-Dade County and across the world. I want to be very clear. I stand unequivocally with those struggling, those brave enough to speak out in Cuba in their pursuit of freedom. We hear their voices. We hear you calling for Libertad, especially for these women who have risked their lives for this cause, and we must stand with them now and support them. We've always been a welcoming place here in Miami-Dade County, and I'm very proud as mayor to stand for that principle. We know so many who come here fleeing oppression, dictatorship, seeking freedom and democracy. It's not only the Cuban community, which of course is one of our largest communities here in Miami-Dade, but others too know the dangers of communism and through the cautionary tales of those who fled communism in Cuba. When Cubans took to the street and their supporters, their allies, 2 years ago, our entire county stood united to support the call for freedom and dignity and basic human rights. And I personally took to the streets on Calle Ocho at the Freedom Tower. And then we stood again just a few weeks ago, as brave souls stood up. I sent a letter to the president. I asked him to listen to the voices of Cuban leaders in the island and in the U.S. to make sure there was interconnectivity so that the voices would be heard, to enhance the internet connectivity. And I am proud to stand with those who have taken the steps to support everyone demanding freedom. We will continue to stand until the people of Cuba are free. Estamos aquí en la Ermita de la Caridad, un lugar sagrado y especial para los cubanos y todos nosotros aquí en Miami. Apoyo el pueblo valiente de Cuba en su búsqueda por la libertad. Escuchamos sus voces pidiendo patria y vida. Y me uno al llamado por la libertad de todas las mujeres que están detenidas en Cuba como prisioneras políticas. Miami-Dade siempre ha sido una comunidad que le da la bienvenida a las personas que vienen aquí huyendo de la opresión política y buscando libertad y democracia. La comunidad cubana no solo es una de las más grandes, de Miami-Dade, sino que también muchos en nuestra comunidad conocen los peligros del comunismo y estamos unidos con la comunidad cubana. Cuando los cubanos de la isla y de toda nuestra comunidad salieron a las calles hace 2 años pidiendo libertad, dignidad y derechos humanos, todos los apoyamos aquí. Y personalmente yo fui a las protestas frente de la Torre de la Libertad y en la calle 8. Envié una carta al presidente Biden pidiéndole que escuchara las voces de los líderes cubanos en la isla y acá, y que apoyara mejorando la conexión al internet y el flujo de información en la isla. Y volvimos a apoyarlos cuando salieron a las calles hace unas semanas. Y aquí vamos a seguir adelante, juntos, unidos, hasta que todos tienen su libertad. Gracias.
Thank you, Mayor, for your kind words. Next, I would like to welcome to the podium the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Enrique Roy.
Buenas tardes a todos y todas. Es un gran gusto de poder estar aquí con ustedes hoy día. Thank you to the Cuban American Bar Association for hosting us this afternoon. So let me start by saying I know there are many views, many histories, many backgrounds in this room today. I'm fortunate and proud to represent the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, specifically at this event, because I can confidently say that what brings us together is that we all share the commitment to fighting for and advocating for the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Cuban people. At the Department of State, it is not just my Bureau's role to advocate for human rights. It is incumbent on every official in every bureau to make human rights part of our work. The same is true of broader society. Even if you don't work full-time on human rights, you have a role to play in advocating for those rights, fundamental freedoms, and unjustly retreating political prisoners. This is the cornerstone of the United States foreign policy toward Cuba, and I'm honored to stand in front of you, the fighters, the activists, the policymakers, the truth tellers, the influencers, all dedicated to seeing Cuba where people are free to exercise their rights without fear of harassment, retribution, or imprisonment. And I know all of you, like myself, have been following the recent protests in Cuba, in which brave citizens peacefully called upon their government to provide the most basic of human necessities, food, electricity, and freedom. And like you all, I'm reminded of the historic July 11, 2021 protests for which an estimated 700 individuals remain unjustly detained today. Civil society estimates there are approximately 1,000 unjustly detained political prisoners overall in Cuba. These include around 100 women, among them 5 members of the famed Damas de Blanco and other members of political, civil, and human rights organizations. And as we also know, women have always held a leading role in protests on the island, either visibly in public or behind the scenes from their homes. We also know that women often suffer disproportionately from repressive government tactics. Reports describe how prisoners are subjected to mistreatment, including isolation, denial of visits by family